Well, this video isn't going to be divisive at all, is it? Old versus new, what's better? In order to make a decision, I will be judging each Who era by 7 different categories, and they are the Doctors, the Companions, the TARDIS, the Villains, the Episodes, Special Effects, and Continuity Errors. So let's begin in reverse order and start with continuity errors. Let's be honest here, both eras have many contradictions, but which one is the least damaging? Despite Classic Who having some huge plot points, NuWho has created a bigger number of inconsistencies over a shorter amount of time. Although I don't really think that's NuWho's fault, because we now live in a time where we watch almost anything we want whenever we want. So it's easier to spot any errors which we then report online to spoil other people's enjoyment. Whereas back in the day, unless episodes were repeated, there was a very good chance that if you missed it once, you missed it altogether. So for that very reason, Classic Who takes the lead. Next up is special effects, and we all know where this is going, don't we? Most of the special effects in Classic Who are pretty bad. I'm not saying they weren't good for their time, but their time has passed. NuWho has the ability to apply prosthetics to an actor's face rather than give an actor a mask and say, "Hey, put this on, you're a Silurian now." Even standard special effects for the show, such as the TARDIS arriving or leaving, is a vast improvement in NuWho. In Classic Who, you can see how things were achieved, which no longer makes the effects special. So this point goes to NuWho, and with the scores tied at 1-1, we move on to the next category, the episodes. Even though the older episodes had a shorter runtime, most stories ran for at least 4 episodes. This meant character and world building had over twice the time to develop. This is why I think the pacing in Classic Who works better, as they had a clear idea on what time limits they had for each story. So this point goes to Classic Who, which now leads 2-1. Next up, we have the villains. And in order to make this category work, I will be judging the villains in which era they first appeared in. So Classic Who wins. Maybe if there were more episodes to feature the Sycorax, the Weeping Angels or the Silence, NuWho might have had a fighting chance. But let's face it, when people think of Doctor Who villains, they think of the Daleks, the Cybermen or the Master. So for that very reason, the point goes to Classic Who. Next up is the TARDIS. And whilst I like the old designs, it just looks like a studio set. Also, I've never been able to understand how the doors work. The Doctor opens them from the console, yet when we cut to an exterior shot, they're being opened by hand. At least that confusion isn't present in NuWho, as the doors are the same for both interior and exterior shots. But maybe I should talk about something else, as it would be insane to base my entire argument on the shape of the doors. So let's talk about the overall design of the TARDIS. And it really comes down to this. Do you prefer the white, sterile environment that is reminiscent of a hospital, which is where you'd find a doctor, or do you prefer the strange alien-like environment, which is where you'd expect to find an alien? My personal preference is an alien-like environment. So the point goes to NuWho, which means Classic Who still has 3, whilst NuWho is gaining on it with 2. Now we move on to the penultimate category, the Companions. And this is tough. However, if we look at what roles each companion played whilst present, it's clear to see those in NuWho have had a greater impact on the show. Another reason to why Classic Who is losing this point is many of the companions are very similar to each other. It's almost as if the producers replaced a departing character's name in the script with an arriving character in any of the upcoming episodes the original companion was supposed to be a part of. So with that point going to NuWho, that brings the score to Classic Who 3, NuWho 3. And so it comes down to a tiebreaker. And seeing as this will be the point that wins it for either side, it's kind of fitting that the final category is the Doctor himself. It's shocking, I know. It's almost as if I planned it this way. But before I continue, let me just explain why I'm placing Paul McGann as a NuWho Doctor. Basically, it's because out of his 2 live action appearances, only one of those were during a particular production's era, and that was NuWho when he returned for the Night of the Doctor. So for this point and the win, I'm giving it to Classic Who. And my reasons are thus. Apart from the 6th Doctor having some similarities to the 1st Doctor, each Classic Who incarnation feels like a completely different character. Whereas the problem with NuWho Doctors is that most of them are kind of based on Classic Who Doctors. Tennant's Doctor shares many similarities with Davison's Doctor, Smith's Doctor shares many similarities with Troughton's Doctor, and Capaldi's Doctor shares many similarities with Hartnell's Doctor. Ironically, the NuWho Doctors that feel like completely original creations are the ones with the least amount of on-screen appearances. Despite having strong ties to the Time War, the Doctors of Paul McGann, John Hurt and Christopher Eccleston have very different characteristics. You would think the Time War would make them more alike with each other than any other Doctor, but no. You have the Doctor who refused to be involved, the Doctor who ended it, and the Doctor that regrets the decision of his predecessor. 3 completely different characteristics united by one terrifying event. If only the following Doctors were their own men, NuWho would have won this silly little competition that I have put together.